Well, I'm so pleased to have my guest today, Dr. Patrick Porter. He's a neuroscience expert, brain fitness pioneer, and inventor of the brain tap system, working on with brainwave entrainment since the 1980s, co-developing one of the first personal brain training devices long before biohacking was trendy. So, thank you so much, Dr. Porter, for joining me today.
It's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
So I'm obviously the big question, how did you become so obsessed with training the brain?
Well, my dad was an alcoholic, so the church came over one Thursday evening and said, "Hey, Michael, we're going to help you become alcohol free. We need you to go to this relaxation seminar." And when he went there, he relaxed for the first time, really. And it was a meditation practice. It was a Catholic church, and it was called the Silva Method. And so we went through the Silva Method, and my dad came home and he never drank again. And he realized that what he was drinking for was because he was calming. Now, in the back of the room, he didn't realize it at the time, but they were playing a tone that was called the Silva sound. We would now call this in neuroscience isochronic tone. So think of an isochronic tone like if you and I went to the mountaintop and we're sitting there relaxing, we just think, wow, this mountaintop experience is pretty cool. But really, that mountain is resonating at 7.8 hertz frequency. So it's actually our body, our mirror neurons are actually resonating with the mountain, and we begin to become coherent with the mountain. At that moment, we begin to create more GABA, which is a suppressant. So, for an alcoholic, it suppresses those anxieties, fears, frustrations. And then, of course, GABA is a precursor to DMT. So, you can have those spiritual type experiences that happen. So, I grew up with this, and I was a very troubled teen. My dad said, "Hey, there's one common denominator in your life, and it's you." And my dad got really smart after he stopped drinking. And he became a Silva instructor. He was one of the very first in the country. And so I was running around doing seminars with him since from a very young age. But what he showed me, and one of the things I think for the listeners to understand is that parenting is pretty much done all wrong. We send kids to the room and we tell them to think about what they did. Well, my dad learned from his experience. He said, anytime we got in trouble, he had a row of positive books. And we would have to go pick one of those books out, and we'd have to go to our room, read it, or read a chapter, and then come out and tell him how we were going to apply that in our life. And if we could do that, we could go out and play. So at first, we're faking it. We're trying to do our best to scam dad. But there was one book that really resonated with me. It's called As a Man Thinketh, and that changed the way I thought from that day forward. And the rest is history. The divine providence or God or whoever you want to say, the universe aligned the stars. And when I was going to school for electronics, I was still working with my dad, and I got met up with a group called Light and Sound Research, and they together with them, I was their researcher. We were just doing sound at the time. There was no LEDs. So imagine people go, "Did you take neuroscience in school?" I said, there was no neuroscience in school when I was going to school, but there was biofeedback. So we could look at respiration, heart rate, hand temperature, and we were looking at how could we get people out of pain. And what we know is with brain waves, that if we can get you out of the beta brainwave, which is the reactionary mind, we can turn on the alpha theta brainwaves, which actually create your own natural analgesia. So what happens is your body basically heals itself when you get into these states. And so I became thrilled with it. During that process, we were working with candles. So imagine this, people meditate to candles all the time, right? So when you look at a candle, actually, again, the mirror neurons are tuning into that candle. You've probably been at a campfire before and people go, that fire is mesmerizing. I can't take my eyes off it. Well, that's because the ancient tribes, the ancient teachings knew that if we could, at the end of the day, imagine every day you get up, you don't even know if you're going to survive tomorrow. You're hunting and gathering, whatever, but you'd make your way to the communal village. You'd have your fire burning. That fire is burning at 10 hertz frequency. That happens to be alpha. That's the base level for the brain. Now we go to theta now with light, but when you're looking at that light and that fire is giving off infrared light. So like when you said about biohacking, these people were biohacking before we knew what biohacking was. They were just using ancient traditions. So in the process of this program, they would downregulate their nervous system. They would download the information for the tribe. Hey, the berries are over here, the buffalo are over here, whatever it was. And then when the logs burned out, they didn't go get another log. They went to bed, right? They didn't have Netflix. They didn't go to the next, it didn't go to the next series. So part of our problem is I tell people that today your life, your brain was not designed for the life you're living. This brain was designed for the Serengeti, where we work 4 hours a day, we hunt, gather, we come back to the tribal village, we do what we need to do, we have community activities, we interact, we relax. Our body is designed for high levels of stress and then high levels of relaxation. But we've lost out on that restorative relaxation. So in my I started a franchise company actually out of that. And then from that, I sold that in 2004 and then was kind of semi-retired. Not, I'm too young to retire. I'm still too young to retire. I'm only 64 years old. So, there's a lot more to do. I feel like every day is the first day of school. And so but I thought, well, nobody's advancing this technology. So in 2012, I decided, what could I do differently that no one else is doing, that has never been done before, that can change consciousness? So when somebody says, why do you want to better a billion brains? Well, MIT has just 5 weeks ago came out with a study that showed that our human brain transmits thoughts 10,000 miles away from the person thinking the thought. So MIT shares this knowledge with us, and they said there's a web of information similar to the internet. And I'm going, wow, this sounds like metaphysics or something. But our neuroscientists are becoming more and more like shaman than they are medical doctors, because the more you delve deep into it, you realize that there is an underlying consciousness to all things. And I think that when we resonate, and unfortunately, the listeners, maybe your listeners are not this way, but I know if they have Lyme or cancer or something like that, they're going to have stress. And of course, if our biological system is not in order, then our psychological system is going to be out of order, and our spiritual connection is going to be disconnected. So my goal is to get people to resonate or harmonize with their true self, really. They're the innate healer, because all healing happens within you. And so as you and I'll just give this one example, then we'll move on. But imagine you have a fish tank and all the little fish swimming in there, and the fish tank gets dirty, and you take every fish out. Like I got Lyme disease, I take the fish tank out, I fix lines, I put it back into the fish tank. Well, that fish is going to get sick again. I take another fish out. This fish is cancer. I fix the cancer. I put it back into the fish tank. It get cancer again. We have to fix the environment. So in 1994, this is not new news. It's just never been publicized. But in 1994, the National Institute of Health here in the United States said that we have a biofield that extends 3 feet around us, or 18 inches. Now they say three feet, but back then they said 18 inches. And they said all illness starts in this field. So we are, when you think of the electron transport chain, that's the body. So what is that? That's transforming everything from sounds to thoughts to experiences to food to water to beverages. You have to convert all that into energy on this transport chain, and then it becomes light. So in essence, everyone listening, I'm sorry to tell you, but you are not physical. You are a light being. And now in science, one of the most exciting things about my field is that they now know that we have a biophotonic field. And medicine is now entering into that field. And I think it's going to be such an exciting place to be, because when you change the root, and I don't even think that's the root. There's something probably beyond that, because it's like looking at a microscope, electron microscope, and you go down and go deeper and deeper and deeper, and you see it just keeps going on to infinitesimal experiences. But we know that if we want to get if we want to get the weeds out of the garden, we got to pull them out by the roots. So we got to go to the root cause, and it's really about energy. So we'll talk a lot about energy today and how to upgrade the energy in the brain so that it moves down through the spine, moves out through the body, and gets the right communication from the heart to the gut to the brain, and create health and wealth and everything we should be having as human beings on this planet.
That I mean, you brought up so many amazing things, and that's um. So let's just kind of define consciousness. I mean, because here you talked a little bit about, yeah, what was that 10,000 miles that
Yes.
you could actually measure the thought of an individual 10,000 miles away. So
Yes.
obviously now you're swimming in that sea
Yeah.
of consciousness of all these individuals. So obviously, if we create a chain that each individual, let's say each individual is 10,000 miles away, you're still going to pick up this person, and then the next person is going to be carrying the consciousness of that individual, and then the next person that's 10,000 miles away is going to pick up both consciousness because it becomes like a flow. So we're essentially just swimming in the sea of consciousness.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. And another thing for the listeners, just to kind of go, what? The scientists said that 7 generations of our ancestors are now their DNA. When you were born, your mom and dad, when they met, the cells, when they combined, they merged all the information they knew from their mom and dads, from their mom and dads, all the way back to the very beginning of time. Now they're saying 54 generations. I think eventually they'll say back to the very beginning of time. It's resonating within you now as a pattern. So I tell people, now the Hopi Indians said this hundreds of years ago, right? They said 7 generations of our ancestors are guiding us. But what we know is that I tell people the best example I can give is if people can remember back when AOL first started, and they would send you a CD, and you get the CD and says free week, and you go on, your modem would kick on, you get on the internet. This is how you connected to the internet, which is consciousness. So you have this CD. So think of your cells as this CD. Now, what you do if you wanted to keep going, you had to call them and get a code. That code would be put into the computer. Now you have direct connection anytime you want. So think of your brain waves like the code. And one of the most fascinating things we found out, back in 2003, they said, hey, we mapped the human genome. Everybody, yeah, wow. And then they said, oh, by the way, 99% of what makes you up is junk. And we went, what? You know, could you imagine graduating college and you only answered 1% of the questions and they give you a diploma? I mean, these guys are celebrating, they're getting Nobel Prizes, they're doing all this. But in 2018, because the science has reached this level now, they said, wow, look that's not junk DNA anymore. That DNA has switches on it. They call it epigenetics, and they change approximately every 40 seconds. So while we're talking, you and I, we are totally different people from the ones that started this podcast. Not just that our cells are changing at 50 million cells per second, but our DNA is changing. So when you think about your body and whether you're going through Lyme's or cancer or brain problems or whatever's going on, the ancients would say, and I live near a river. It's called the Neuse River. I look out at that river and I say, wow, that river it looks the same as it did yesterday. But the reality is that's a different river. There's different fish. There's different sediments. Everything's different. So the ancients would say, you never awaken in the same body twice. So you are a different person and you've died thousands of times because the body we have today, I'm only 7 years old at the oldest cell in my body, right? So on a physiological level, but the energy that makes up who we are, that energy carries on and stores as information. And so we have this information stored at the cellular level. And there's a really important part of our physiology that controls this. It's the DNA is really important because if I could take your DNA right now and I could staple it to the floor, it would reach to Pluto. And it's a viscous material, and its whole job is to absorb codes like the AOL CD. It absorbs codes into the body. And MIT, too, by the way, came out with a study that showed that we pull information from the center of the galaxy. Now, I think they're going to say from all known universe, whatever it is. But we're getting tools now that are showing us that we are not disconnected. There is not a singular person on Earth. We think we have this individual ideas and consciousness, but when you think about that consciousness web, they call it collective consciousness or whatever. So when you think about consciousness, the example I like to give is imagine that you're a fish and you're swimming all day long and somebody says water. You go, what do you mean water? And you go, yeah, we're swimming in it. What do you mean water? You don't realize that you're swimming in the water. There's a resistance. If I do this, there's a resistance, right? If I push again, if you push out, there's a resistance to that. That resistance is, they don't know what gravity is, right? They don't know all these things, but all these fields of energy. So every cell in that physiological component I want to talk about is mitochondria, because that mitochondria is also, think of it like a sun in the middle of a galaxy. So imagine those codes I was talking about. That sun up there beams to our body something called the circadian rhythm. Now we've mapped that rhythm, right? Every day at 2 o'clock, our temperature drops 2 degrees. Every day at 2 a.m., it increases 2 degrees, no matter where you're at on the planet. And if you don't get to sleep by 10 o'clock, your brain doesn't instruct your gut to produce melatonin, or your gut probably is the one that's instructing it. Because I like to tell people that's the first gut. The gut brain is the main brain, because if you had a severed spine, you would still digest, metabolize, and you'd still be here. But of course, they all work together. The three brains: the gut brain, the heart brain, and the brain between our ears. But when we get these codes, most of everything we're doing is unconscious to us. But that's the field we're talking about. So how do you get to the field? You have to change your state. When Einstein said you can't solve a problem on the level it was created, you have to go to the solution state. Then with the solution in mind, return back to the problem and solve it. So we've been given those tools. Every person listening to this call, you have the tools you need within you. Now, of course, we've created technology because there's only 4 reasons that people have problems with their body: physical, mental, spiritual, whatever. It's thoughts, traumas, toxins, and technology. Now we have to add that fourth T now, because technology is interfering, because it's beaming a frequency. While we're sitting here talking, this screen, over 1 billion LEDs are changing, and our brain is actually predicting or trying to predict. That's why it's stressful when you sit in front of a computer, because your brain is always looking for patterns. And it's so fast that neuroscience says that we only render 10% of reality. So when you think about that, what are you missing? And when people go, what do you mean by that? I go, have you ever walked out to the kitchen and you said, hey, where's the salt shaker? And they say, it's right there on the counter, and you can't see it. You can't see it. Finally, the person gets up from the table and says, it's right here, dum dum. It's right here in front of you. And you go, it wasn't there a minute ago, because you didn't render it, because we only render 10% of the peripheral, and then our brain makes up the rest. So if you really think about it, we are making this whole thing up. It's not reality. Neuroscience tells us that we are predicting reality. And I was fortunate enough to measure Danica Patrick's brain. She's a race car driver, and she had the highest performing brain I'd ever been able to scan. I've scanned over 30,000 brains in the last 10 years. And it was amazing to me, because the human brain cannot process 180 miles an hour. You can't do it. But she drives at 220 miles an hour. So how does she predict the future? She's moving so fast that her perceptual filters weren't designed for that, but she has the capacity. That's why everyone's not a race car driver, right? And they can't handle it. Not everyone drives a Black Hawk helicopter. Not everyone flies a jet, so you have to find out what your stress levels are. So as we continue, there's 2 things before any wellness can happen in your life, any health or vitality. Number one, you have to look at stress, and how do you don't get rid of stress. I love it when people say, hey, Patrick, can you help me get rid of my stress? I said, you don't want that. That only happens one time in your life. It's called death. That's when you're stressless. You're right. But your body is, and actually, by the way, you lose 3/4 of an ounce. So that's an interesting fact. What is that 3/4 of an ounce that leaves when you die? So they've measured this in science. So when you think about it, so we don't want to get rid of stress. What we want to do is build capacity. We have a 100 billion neurobit processor called the human brain, and it's an interface to consciousness. It perceives through its eyes, it hears through its ears, it sits and feels all the senses. But the reality is every cell does that. You can go on YouTube right now and type in seeing without eyes. And they've taught these kids to see without their eyes. And you can smell without your nose. Every cell, every system, every organ is redundant. We are built to survive. In fact, if you really studied Hindu religion, which of course I was brought up Catholic, so it was a kind of a shock that there was another religion because they told us there was only one religion, So when I started to study this, and I realized they weren't a religion at all until the British came there. They were a philosophy, and what they said was every human is designed to enlighten. Every person listening to this call, you have a divine path. And your body knows how to heal. Your brain has a program to heal. Your body has a program to heal. Now, what happens is we have all these invaders, whether it be Lyme, cancer, whatever you're having, whatever the problem is. That's just the fish in the fish tank. When you change the field and you control your field. So think of it like you have a bed, and the bed is consciousness, and you're a bowling ball. You throw it on the bed, you make a dent in consciousness. Now you become what they call in quantum physics the strange attractor. You attract to your life those things that you perceive and believe. So, they say that when the ships came over from the British ships came over to America, the Indians could not see the ships because they couldn't conceive of a ship that big. They actually believed that the people on the horses were attached to the horses because they'd never seen horses. So, I mean, when you think about what we believe to be true and what is real and what is true, it's totally different. So, when you think about in one of the big things is, I mean, somebody says, I'm overweight, let's use that one as an example, or they are an alcoholic and they go to meetings and they tell people I'm an alcoholic. Well, as you affirm, you become. So, and I'm not against alcoholism, Alcoholics Anonymous. If it works for you, great. It works for 2% of the people. Well, the placebo effect is 40%. So get a better life. You don't have to you don't have to stand up every day and say, and I'll end with this little metaphor. Imagine that I'm Superman and I'm meeting you for the first time. So first thing I do is I bring out kryptonite and I say, this is kryptonite. This is what makes me weak. This is what destroys me. I want you to know about it because this is who I am. I carry kryptonite around with me no, Superman doesn't do that. Superman puts it in a lead box, puts it in the vault, and never tells a soul about it. So all of those negative things that happen to you, we need to forgive, forget, and move on because they don't serve us. We are goal-striving organisms. We want to succeed and achieve. And the two factors that really are into health, but like I said, stress resilience and sleep improvement, but the other two are how do you perceive reality? During COVID, they did a really unique study. You and I right now, the reason I can see you on the screen, you can see me, is I am beaming between 400 meters and 850 nanometer light. And this is beaming from my mitochondria. So they can actually measure this now. So it's not a metaphysical concept that we're light. We are light. We're transmitting and receiving that light energy all the time. So when what they showed was those people that looked at COVID as a threat versus those people that looked at COVID as a challenge. Those people that looked at it as a threat down-regulated their system and produced 200 times less light. So what does that mean to the listeners? That means that if I'm in a gymnasium and I'm going to talk to somebody across the gymnasium, I got to raise my voltage and I got to shout so they can hear me. I don't have the energy to do that. So my cells don't get the right instruction set and they might go crazy. They might have a foreign invader in there, like a Lyme or cancer or whatever like that. And so we're supposed to be producing these T-marked cells and things like that. And the body knows what to do, but we're interfering with it because we're not cleaning the field. And we cannot do that while we're awake. When you're awake, people think they're thinking. But neuroscience has now proven that we do more thinking when we sleep than when we're awake. More neurological activity happens when you're sleeping. So sleeping isn't just a luxury, it's a necessity. And we need that 1 hour of deep sleep and 2 hours of REM sleep just to be part of what we call the human race, right? When we get up every morning, we become part of the human race. And most people don't realize that they have to run the 100-yard dash. They never train for it. They never prepared their mind, their body. And then they get into a situation, they go, why did God give me this body? Why did these things happen to me? And we go, well, look at your past. The body keeps score. And as the body keeps score, it's going to tell us. First, it's going to whisper. then it's going to raise its voice, and then it's going to have a breakdown. But it's going to get you to recognize, and whatever's happening to you out there, if you're listening and you're going through some troubled times, there's never been a superhero that didn't have to go through the dark night of the soul. So imagine if you're an alcoholic and you now overcome alcohol. Because if alcohol was never on the planet, if we never knew about alcohol, there would be no such thing as alcoholism. That's why I know it's not a real thing. Man made it, man created it, and then it's causing all this trouble. Nobody can drink alcohol. I mean, they took race car drivers and gave them a few drinks and they couldn't perform on the track. So, I mean, if you take world-class athletes, give them a couple beers, they can't even drive. So nobody can do this. But if you do it, I'm not against it. I mean, I don't do it myself, but if you want to do it, you just have to know that you're compromising your system. You're using a neurotoxin to basically offload consciousness and really dumb yourself down so you can, some people say I just needed to cool off or chill out. And my dad, he did it because he thought it relaxed him. But the problem is that when you put a chemical into your body or sugar or anything else, you don't control it anymore. The body has to go through its cycles. So the duration of time, just like any medicine has a half-life, so does sugar, and so does bad thoughts, and so does everything else in our lives. So when we think about these things, we need to, that's why you have to step outside of reality, really, get into a mindfulness state. And what I found in my career, because I'm a psychologist by training, is that most people can't get out of their own way. They are so invested in their disease or in their illness or in their lifestyle. And that's why my first book, I've written 10 books, but my first book is called Awaken the Genius. And I have a chapter in there, and I always get questioned when that book came out and I did tours and radio shows and TV shows. They always ask me, you have a chapter in there that says you were blessed to be the son of an alcoholic. What do you mean by that? And I said, well, if you can't take your biggest liability and make it your superpower, you've already lost. Like that alcoholic, once they can say no to alcohol, they have a superpower. Once you overcome Lyme, you have a superpower. Once you overcome cancer, you have a superpower. You can tell other people, don't worry, because the medical community, unfortunately, we have two different groups working with us. We have the sick care community and we have the healthcare community. And they're confused. If I could talk to Robert Kennedy again one time, I would say, I would push for changing the name of their system. They are not a healthcare system. You go to them and they say, you know what? We ran all the tests we can. You're fine. Or they say, you're not bad enough yet. Why don't you get a little worse, and then we can cut, we can take out, we can remove, we can do all these things, because they don't know what to do if it's not on paper. Because that's not the problem. But there's another group like you and other people out there that are saying, hey, look, why don't we just stay healthy? How do we stay healthy? Because the body is designed to be in a state of health, in what they call homeostasis. It's not designed to be diseased and sick and miserable. We're designed to be happy, healthy, loving people and have a great community. The problem is that we've been hoodwinked. We've been, some people would say, programmed really to think this way. We think we need, if the neighbor gets a new car, we need to get a new car. If a family member gets a big house, we got to get a bigger house. All these things, because we're always chasing that dream, but the dream is within you. So if we can, if you think about the one question I always ask my clients, if all that happened, let's imagine we're sitting here in the room and I had a magic wand, I could wave it past you and everything changed. Your past was perfect. Your bank accounts are full. You have all the money in the world. You could do whatever you want to do. What would you do right now? Right this very moment? How would you breathe? How would you think? How would you experience? That's the mindfulness state that we want to start permeating into this consciousness, because it is possible. People go, what do you mean by that? I go, if we took all the money in circulation, all the money that's out there just floating around, nobody owns it right now. It's just out there in circulation. We would all get $3 million. How would most people's lives change if they had $3 million in the bank right now? It's out there. It's in circulation. So what we have to do is we have to show up that consciousness, that when you throw that bowling ball on that mattress, you're saying, I'm here. I'm ready. Show me what I need to learn. Because whatever you're going through right now, whether it's the dark night of the soul or you've made it through that and you're looking back at it in your rearview mirror, That's your superpower. That's your job now, is to share that message with other people to tell them that you're okay, that there are people like your podcast and other people that are doing wellness work, that you don't have to listen to the story or the narrative because, just like most people don't realize that they get paid when you get sick. The sicker you become, the more money they make. And the healthcare, if you're a business owner, you know this because your rates just went up about 18% because of all the problems they've caused by giving us these foreign invaders into our bodies. And so here we are, and people go, "Well, my doctor would never do that." Your doctor doesn't know squat unless he's part of the 300,000 doctors that are leaving the medical field for the wellness field. So here we are. We're in a new paradigm, and if they're listening to your podcast, I'm sure that they're open-minded. And when I've listened to some of your podcasts, they're amazing. And you're getting guests on there that are, we need everyone to step up to scream as loud as they can that you're not your biology, you're not your past history. You are an infinite being with potential to be healthy, vibrant, have great relationships, have a great working life, whatever you want to do. And it can start today. But they don't, if you see, if you, in India, I go to India all the time because I'm partners with Ames Bhopal, which is our research partners, and they don't have rear view mirrors, not side mirrors, rear view mirrors, anything. I said, why don't you have mirrors on you? It says, no, we're taught only look forward. If you look backwards, you're going to crash, right? And if you've ever been to India, it's pretty scary for an American because we're always looking, we're looking behind us all the time. What's going on behind us? What's going on over here, over here? No, they're just so when you're in a wellness journey, you need to just be looking forward. What can you do today? Don't worry about the past. I always tell people, you always have the option to go back to what doesn't work. So let's try something different. And that's kind of the scientific way of looking at wellness because every person is a biological unique person. They're never the same. Something that works for me might not work for you, but hopefully something I say will spark some curiosity and get your energy flowing because again, it's an energy equation. If we can get the energy up in the cells will communicate with the systems and the organs and the body and the field, and then the body will heal itself. It's innate intelligence. It knows how to do it. We just get in the way.
Yeah, I mean, it essentially, I mean, we are beings of light. I mean, so you have these interfaces, which I think is fascinating. So we're talking about consciousness, we're talking about energy, talking about light. We have physical matter. We also have, the thought patterns in itself, and you're talking about kind of the bowling ball and the mattress, that curved space
Yes.
that becomes like the uh, what's that? It pulls energy. It creates itself. What do you call it? The attractor? Yeah, which is
Yes.
the
The strange
attractor.
attractor. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. You become the strange attractor in your life.
yeah, and with that, so your traumas. You talked about traumas. You talked about toxins. You talked about belief systems, and that becomes the attractor, that strange attractor, and you're connected to. You talked about the 10,000 miles. I mean, so you essentially have access to all the information everywhere, all the solutions, and you can attract whatever it is that you are wanting. But if you are wanting then trauma, if you're wanting fear, anxiety, if that is the frequency that you're resonating with, then that becomes what your body is made out of. Because like you said, we have first that field outside, and that field is what then creates the physical being, and that field is connected to everything. So we control then, that field and then what happens physically.
One of the things, just for the listeners to kind of put in perspective, when I was growing up, we didn't have all the TV stations and radio stations we have there, or internet, But what we did in science class was we took a potato and we hooked a speaker to it, and then we went to get KNR, which is our local radio station. I could go to Radio Shack, get the crystal. I put it in the potato. It would start broadcasting that signal because the signal was everywhere. I just needed that crystal. So these thoughts are like these crystals. If we don't want to get KNR, we just pull the crystal out of the potato. It no longer broadcasts to the speaker. We put another crystal in. Maybe we want country music, or maybe we want classical music. These are our thoughts, and our body crystallizes. So what happens is we crystallize, and it forms basically information systems. They now know. I know a lot of people are going through weight problems and things like that. They know that when you have a gut, that has all this fat in there, they now know it actually forms a brain. It begins to think for itself. So when people go, I crave these foods, well, it's the gut that's craving them because you created the bugs. We're 54% something else. We're not 100% human. We have all these bugs inside of us that are good and bad. They're always at war. They're always doing their thing, they keeping that balance. But the thing is that most people don't realize that they can go in and they can start clearing those out. And through some very easy practices, like at BrainTap, we teach people the first thing is to wake up in the morning and train your brain, which is called SMR, sensory motor rhythms. Now, most people, unfortunately, what they do is they wake up to an alarm clock. And one of the things I tell people is get rid of your alarm clock, set your phone at least 4 feet away from you, and set it to some beautiful music to wake you up to. You're arriving back to your home here on Earth, and this is the day you get to celebrate. Every day is like first day of school for me. It could be Christmas morning, whatever you want to think about. Something new and different is going to happen today. But if you wake up with the alarm clock, something really bizarre happens with our body. We immediately get a stress response. Now, that stress response tells our liver to release 25 grams of sugar, glucagon, from the liver. Now, then insulin has to be released immediately. You're just laying in bed, you're not even doing anything. Now, immediately, it takes all the sugar in your bloodstream and puts it into the adipose tissue. Now you have no energy because your body already produced all the sugar needed in the muscles. You didn't get up and work out. You're just laying in bed. And the average American hits the alarm clock 3 times. That's like eating 3 candy bars before they get out of bed. No, and I love it when people say, I got diabetes, but I don't eat sugar. I said, you don't need sugar. I've never met anyone that had a carbohydrate deficiency. The problem is that you are adding sugar to a system that doesn't need sugar. We produce our own sugar. But if you wake up gently, imagine you're an ancient tribe and the sun comes up, you spark, it triggers your brain, norepinephrine, dopamine, cortisol rages in the brain, and it's been building up all night. So that in the morning, that cortisol trough is high. You're ready to go. You should be a little nervous. It should be a little exciting. It should be that's not a bad thing. That's a good thing. Because in ancient times, we were part of the food chain. Right? So we'd get up and start doing something. But now what happens is by 2 o'clock, that cortisol trough drops. Now, if you keep that cortisol trough high because you look at your cell phone and you're fearful, or you watch the news and you listen to, I always tell people, if you're too happy, I have the solution. Just turn on CNN because they'll make you miserable within 5 minutes. They search the whole globe to give us bad news, that can keep us miserable. So, whatever you do as much as you can to stay positive in the morning, because if you win the morning, you win the day. But at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, you should have a psychological low. It's normal. You might feel tired, you might feel depressed, you might feel angry, but that's your body telling you it's time for a nap. But we don't have time for naps. So we created a 20-minute session, and we proved this at Microsoft and Google. They wanted us to prove to them that we could. They said to me, Dr. Porter, can you help us with burnout at Google? When everybody went back to the offices after COVID, a lot of people didn't like their offices anymore because they were at home in their underwear doing their work, doing whatever. And then they had to go back in the office, and it was a grind. And at Microsoft and Google, Julie Arndt, there's a TED Talk about it now, but she talked to, we put this program together, and I said, just have them do a brain tap session at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Well, when I talked to the programmers, they go, no way, we can't do that. We can't take 20 minutes out to do this. And I said, give me 2 weeks and you will never stop doing it. And because they were programmers, we could measure their keystrokes. We found out that they actually did 26% more work on the days they did brain tap for 20 minutes than the days they didn't. So I showed them, I said, when you take this 20-minute break, you actually get a day and a quarter more work done. It doesn't make sense to our conscious mind because our conscious mind thinks we got to do, but it's all about recovery. If we don't give our body time to recover from this human race that we're in, and everybody's racing, you need to take time out to do this. So then again, if you reboot the system, which we would do in the Serengeti, what happens at 2 o'clock in the afternoon? Absolutely nothing. The lion's sleeping, the zebras are sleeping, the giraffes are sleeping. Nobody's up running around at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. That's why everybody, we could trace our ancestry, our DNA back to the Serengeti. So our body is still, it hasn't changed much in 200,000 years. This is the same body that was there in the Serengeti. It's just we have technology around us and we have roads and we have all this great stuff, but the bodies haven't changed. We haven't adapted, we haven't evolved. So then when we reboot, we get a new cortisol trough, which means now we're excited. We're ready to go after the afternoon. We're ready to charge out and do it. So then at night, when we need to down regulate, most people don't have a good sleep routine, right? And everybody's blaming blue light. It's not blue light. Blue light is part of the equation. It's not the whole equation. Because if blue light was the problem, we wouldn't have blue skies. If you take blue light out of the equation, we have a lot of depressed people, angry people, depressed people, and sick people. You need blue light, but you don't need as much in the evening, and you don't need it from your screens. So that's a truism. But you don't need to go buy glasses to do that. But if you want to buy them, and I have a pair here that if I do work on my computer at night, I will put them on. These glasses actually have blue blocking technology in them because I use them on the computer. Because this light is not good, because this is dirty light. If we could take the spectrum of light in the universe and put it on our computer screen, we're only perceiving not even a hair of it. All those other frequencies, all those other lights, all those other colors, all those other things are happening, but we don't have the perceptual filters. It's like one of those, back when I was a kid, you'd get a piece of paper and you'd get this decoder circle, and when you ran it over the paper, you'd see things that were hidden in the picture, but you couldn't see them with your eyes, but you could see them with that filter. That's like our eyes. We have these filters. And you might have heard of something called nose blindness. If somebody lives next to a dump or a site, they don't smell it anymore because the brain is really good at, getting rid of those sounds. So we need to figure out what are the filters that are stopping us from perceiving the unique opportunities, the peak performance moments that we want, the love, the sharing, the caring, whatever is going to make our life work for us, because it's there in the field. But if we're still broadcasting for K&R and we want country music or we want classical music, we got to change that crystal. That's the field. You got to work on the body. For brain health, you can't outthink a bad diet. You've got to, unless you're a shaman or a Saint Germain, and you can basically take garbage and make it into good food. You're going to be at a loss. And then you got to move and breathe with this body. This body cannot function without movement. The less you move, the less it works. The more you move, the better it works. So we believe that Tai Chi, yoga, dancing, singing, all these things, they're so good. When I've measured people that are dancers and singers and Tai Chi masters and yoga teachers that do yoga nidra. Now, I had a person just the other day, I was in Mexico City, and this yoga teacher was going through some health crisis. I said, man, you're doing all the things that we ask people to do. I said, do you do yoga nidra? She goes, oh no, I lead the classes, but I never do it for myself. I said, in India, they say the most important yoga pose is the corpse pose. After you're done with yoga, you relax. And this is because yoga was designed to get the brain ready for meditation. It wasn't designed for exercise. It was designed to give you energy. And most people don't have energy. And I talked about that at the very beginning. When we measure brains, when you were born, and everyone listening, by the way, you were the smartest you were ever going to be at that moment. You were a 100 billion neural processor. You were totally wired. You had 18.1 volts. You were a bright star, and you could learn a language. You could learn how to use your body. You could learn this environment. All that happened magically within 1 or 2 years. And by 3 years old, you're going, wow, that's a little person. How did that happen? It's because the information was within them. It just had to be unlocked. And so with all this information, now as we age, unfortunately, because sleeping patterns change, stress, bad foods, our environment, our lifestyle, really, because I don't know any ancient culture today that says, you know what, we kept the wisdom of the tribe with the youngsters. No, they kept it with the elders. Why would they keep it with the youngsters? So what's going on with our elders? We put them away in homes, and we don't download their tribal knowledge. We don't they've learned so much. Every person has a life history that can help humanity if we could somehow extract it from them. But if I could measure most people who are listening in this call, you'd probably be around 10.1 volts if you're healthy and everything's going right. So imagine that your voltage went in half. So you're used to coming into a room, it's 100 watts. Now it's 50 watts. So you don't see everything as clearly. You don't have as much, you don't have what they call neuroplasticity because of something called neural pruning. And this happens and the more you know, unfortunately, the dumber you become. And we saw that in COVID because what happens is as soon as you think you know the path to your solution, you've already lost unless that path is right. And sometimes you're right. They say a broken clock is right twice a day. So when some people and a lot of professors and a lot of highly educated people, they get so in religious people, they believe that this is what it is and everybody needs to see this way. But the reality is that there's an infinite number of ways to succeed from any one moment in time. And when you have that, if I can get one new thought in the listener's mind today, I've done my job because the whole brain has to rewire. And when it rewires, it gets rid of all those negative thoughts that don't support that belief anymore. That's what needs to happen for a health journey to really achieve. You need to unlock the belief, that something's going to happen. Now, if your voltage drops below 7, we did a study in Florida. It's in a book now called Saving Your Brain. And what we showed was when we got the voltage over 7, because everybody in the study, the dementia study, was under 7 volts. As soon as we got their voltage up over 7, they no longer had dementia symptoms because it's an energy problem. If they drop below 4, we found that they had Alzheimer's symptoms. Of course, when it drops below 1, 0, and you're dead because you're neuropruning. Your body doesn't have enough energy to support your thinking processes. So your body just basically shuts down. So we need to do everything we can, eating healthy, vibrant foods, taking the right supplements. We can't live without supplements. I'm sorry, guys. I wish we could do it, but that's not the case. Our food is not as good as it used to be. It takes 30 oranges to give us the same vitamin C that one orange used to give me in the 1970s. So here we are, we're at a deficiency right from the get-go. We've got to get up, moving and breathing. 20 minutes of sitting is equivalent to smoking a cigarette. Cigarettes are getting everything bad is being compared to cigarettes. They say if you don't have a community to talk to, it's like smoking a cigarette. It's so but 30 years ago when I was first in practice, doctors were still prescribing cigarettes for stress. This is how stupid they are because they're taking the fish out of the fish tank and they're thinking they're not changing the field. So when you think about everything you do is an energy equation. Is that food you're going to eat? Is it going to translate into my body as energy and vitality? Or is it going to be a detriment? Does my body have to take all of its resources to convert it to the electron transport chain, remember, and give us energy? If it doesn't, then the body, we can do that for a while. Like somebody go, I used to be able to eat anything I wanted. Yeah, that's why you can't anymore. Because you ate anything you wanted. And that also includes neurotransmitters. So I'll just talk a little bit about that and then we'll move on. But when you think about, most people don't realize that you only build your neurotransmitter bank account when you're sleeping. So you can take a pill if you want, and it can suppress your neurotransmitters. SSRIs were approved for 14 days of use. That's it. They wouldn't even pass a placebo test now because placebos have beat them every time, and the placebo is now 40%. So that's not doing anything for you. But what happens is the brain patterns after it, unfortunately. And so it's hard to get off there. I'm not saying anybody listening get off their prescription meds, but go to your doctor and say, what is the path? Go to a wellness professional, not the sick care people, but wellness professionals say, look, I want to get off my meds because you have the greatest pharmacy on earth between your ears. It can dispense 30,000 different neurochemicals with just a thought. So why are you going to Walmart? You have your own supply. As Wim Hof says with his breathing techniques, get high in your own supply. You have your own supply in your brain. But the problem is, again, the confusion, the stress, the anxiety, the lack of sleep. So when you're sleeping, as you go through those sleep cycles, every brainwave actually triggers one of the 54 neurotransmitters to be produced in the gut. 95% of all neurotransmitters are produced in the gut and then fed to the brain. Now there's a reserve in the brain, 5%, but most people are burning that out before breakfast. So we need to make sure our and for the listeners who doesn't understand it, when we think of thought, electrical sparks in the brain happen. This is how we can measure it through EEG, but then dendrites happen, and then there's a connection. That connection is the neurotransmitter. So it transmits the information from one cell to the other, tells it what to do. So if you don't have that it's got like you don't have the mailman. If you don't have the mailman out delivering, you can't deliver any mail. So if you don't have the neurotransmitters, that's why there's so much depression and anxiety. Somebody says, we have a mental health crisis in the world today. I said, no, we don't. We have a physiological crisis. People aren't moving and breathing. They're not eating right. We have a lifestyle issue. Everyone wants to say we can't think our way out of it either. We have to do everything has to be done together. There's no one. I mean, I wish there was a pill for every ill, but the reality is you can't have a pill without the skill. We got to create the skills so they don't need the pill, and our bodies can do that.
And so are there other ways? I mean, you talked about the energy of the brain, once it below, falls like 7 or below, then we start to have big issues. So other than all the kind of lifestyle changes, being out of nature, sleeping, going to bed at 10 o'clock and getting rid of technology that's interfering with your system and not staring at screens and eating food that fuels that battery effect within our body instead of just being dead food.
Right.
Are there other ways where we can then increase then that brain energy? Because obviously, Alzheimer, dementia, and
Yeah.
depression,
Yeah.
anxiety, and all of that is it. That is a pandemic.
Right. Yes, exactly. Yeah. So many 30-year-olds are getting Alzheimer's now. So then because it's a brain dysfunction. Yeah, there are. And of course, that's why we created Brain Tap to deliver energy to the cells. But I'll talk about that later. But what you can do if you don't own Brain Tap, first thing you can do is go online and just put in breath work and just start playing around with breath work. The breath work controls the nervous system. And then there's three parts of the nervous system people need to be concerned with. One is the sympathetic system. This is our fight or flight. Most people, they have that one mastered. They know how to be stressed out. They don't even get out of bed till they're adequately stressed. The next one is the parasympathetic system. This is your rest, digest, and recovery system. Most people have no concept of this. They think it comes from outside of them. They think it comes from when they get good news or they get to go on a vacation or they get to watch a good movie. No, it comes from within you. You can trigger this system. And then there's the system called the neurohormonal system. This is our biological system. This is the emergency backup system. If we use it too often, we get adrenal fatigue, we get kidney failure, we get stomach problems, we get aches and pains in our joints because the body is not designed to run the system. It's there's the backup system. The electrical system is designed to run the system. So breath work does that. So we say in the morning, if you're going to wake up the brain, you do a psychological breath. So what you do is you breathe in, they call it a psychological sigh. We do this naturally, right? You might be around a family member and they go, what was that sigh about? Well, what they were doing was dogs will do this. They'll shake, right? In cats when they're stressed out because they're trying to get in autistic kids will do it because they have too much energy in the beta brainwave and they call it stimming. But we all do this. But if we can do this in the morning before, don't do it at the breakfast table. People might think you're crazy, but in your bedroom before you leave the room, just do 2 or 3 minutes of that. What that does is up regulates the system. In the morning, you want to be like an athlete, ready. You're ready to, you're running the 100-yard dash today. What are you going to do? So you do the psychological breathing. It creates norepinephrine, dopamine, cortisol, just like a cup of coffee, but it doesn't dampen it. Coffee is one of the worst things you can do first thing in the morning. You want to do that 2 hours after you wake up because if you drink coffee first thing in the morning, you've crushed the cortisol curve. The body goes, wow, he keeps putting coffee in me in the morning. I don't need to create norepinephrine, dopamine, and cortisol. And then that morning you don't have coffee. Your body's going, what the heck? What's going on? I need some coffee, and you get this addictive behavior. But it's really the body just trying to the body is lazy. The brain is lazy. It's going to try to, it uses 20% of the energy or 25, depending on the books you're reading, but it only weighs 3 pounds. So it's 2% of the body weight typically, or maybe a little bit more, but it uses all this energy. So anytime it can offload energy, it's going to do it. Now in the afternoon, what you want to do is something called the box breath. And I always say, imagine you're a Navy SEAL. You're one of 5 people and you're going to go take on that battleship. I think I'm going to be a little stressed. No matter what my training was, no matter what was going on, there's going to be thoughts going on in my mind. So what they taught them was this box breathing. It's very simple. And you can do this at stoplights. You can do this at your appointments. You can do it at home, wherever you want. But in the middle of the day, you want to recalibrate your nervous system. Now, the best thing would be is to do a 4 hour nap, but nobody has 4 hours. So we created Brain Tap to shorten that time to 20 minutes. So, and we take you through the brainwave cycles. But if you're going to do the breath work, what you do is you breathe into the count of four, you hold that for the count of four, and you breathe out to the count of four, and you hold it out to the count of four. That makes the box. And you continue doing that for 2 to 3 minutes. What will happen is you'll have a shift from sympathetic drive to parasympathetic. And your body will say, oh, I got this. It's okay. And sometimes some people might need to do that 2 or 3 times during the day because they might have a stressful call, or they have to work with an employer, talk to a boss, or they have a difficult situation. We need to, one of the best things people can do in any situation is pause, break, and breathe, then respond. There's no rule in the universe that says when somebody says something to you, you have to answer right away. Start interrupting the patterns, because it's our reactionary mind that gets us in trouble. I tell people your reactionary mind is like Freddy Krueger driving a bus and you're handcuffed to the back, and you keep complaining and you keep trying to change yourself in the back of the bus, but you got to kick Freddy Krueger off the bus. So this is how you kick him off the bus, so you can take control of the bus and you go where you want to go. Now at night when you're going to sleep, one of the things we teach all our athletes and clients now, because we have a lot of pro athletes, college athletes, and things like that using Brain Tap. But we say when you don't have time to do Brain Tap, maybe you didn't bring it with you on the trip, whatever's going on, what we want you to do is something called the 4-8 breath. And what you do is you breathe into the count of four. This is going to trigger your sympathetic system. So you're going to feel a little stressed maybe at first because you haven't trained your brain. But as you breathe in, you're going to recall things from your day. Those things are not good or bad. You don't judge them. You just let them flow through. I tell people your day, let it go through like you have your window open and the breeze is coming through. They're just thoughts about the day. Don't judge them. You did the best you could, whatever, get over it. And I tell people, think of your day like I used to live in Virginia Beach. And when you go to the beach at the end of the day, there's all those footprints. It's all terrible. But you come back in the morning because the waves washed over the beach. The beach looks perfectly manicured. It's super nice. People go back on the beach. That's what our brain needs. So it's going to be all scrambled up. That's what the 2 hours of REM sleep is about. The 1 hour of deep sleep is to detox the brain. If we don't reach level 4 sleep, imagine this. 2014, you're in medical school. Every physiology book in the planet stops the lymphatic system at the neck. In fact, it's still today. But then during a sleep study in 2015, a doctor realizes there's a system in our body that only activates during level 4 sleep called the glial lymphatic system. And if we don't activate that system, all those toxins continue to build up, continue to build up, continue to build up. And then we get foggy brain, we get all these brain disorders because the toxins. So when you're doing this breath, you're breathing into the count of 1 to 4, you hold that breath for a moment, study the tension in your body, and then you slowly breathe out to the count of 7 or 8 or 9 or 10 or whatever you can do. The longer you can extend that exhale, you're turning on the parasympathetic system. This is why we call it brain fitness. So you're exercising. Now we do this in the actual Brain Tap program, but you can do it on your own too. The problem is most people don't do it. They'd rather just take an app and press play and it does it for you. So, and it also uses frequencies and light and things to guide the brain into those states, but you can do this on your own. Once you get to the deep level of relaxation, I tell people, once you mastered this part of it, now as you breathe out, you're going to start creating a gratitude journal in your mind. One that you add to daily, because we know in neuroscience that gratitude does something magical for the brain. It's almost like exercise. When you exercise, physically exercise, this is another thing we need to do. We need to push ourselves to exhaustion, but in brief moments, not running a 5-mile race, but doing something like lifting heavy weights and things like that, because this creates something called BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factors. Think of it as miracle growth for the brain. But what most people do wrong is they exercise and then they go out to their stress-filled life. Just like yoga, at the end of exercise, while you're sitting there toweling off, whether you're at the club or at your house, whatever you're doing, sit for 5 or 10 minutes and just breathe. Let that miracle grow set in. Because if you go back out into the storms of life, you flushed it out of your brain. Because you now started to create cortisol. And cortisol in BDNF, cortisol will win every time. It's an adjutant. It's telling you there's a danger. You don't have to. And what stress does that most people don't understand is that it slows blood flow to the frontal cortex. The frontal cortex is where we do our thinking. And the primitive brain, the amygdala, kicks on and we become animal-like. When somebody says, when you get angry, you're just uncontrollable. Well, yeah, because their animal nature shows up because that's the brain they're using. There's a reason we have a frontal lobe, in reasoning powers. But the problem is if we don't have blood flow, circulation, and oxygen, it's not going to function. And under stress, we know that in the lab that part of the brain shuts down. So when you think about meditation, and meditation's good, don't get me wrong, but I've measured 30,000 brains. I've only met 4 people that could meditate because as soon as they close their eyes, they turn on what's called the default mode network. This is everyone listening, 90% of the thoughts you have today, you had yesterday. Unfortunately, 80% of them are negative. And that's not because you're negative. It's because we're the descendants of a bunch of paranoid people that made it. They didn't get eaten by the lion. They didn't fall off the cliff. Back not too long ago, we didn't know if we were going to live past 35. That's why all these illnesses we have today, they're like, where are they coming from? Well, we're living longer, so we're finding out the limits of our biological system. And, some people believe it's been hacked, so all these things that are happening. So our cells are not designed to die. If you look up online, chicken hearts at Harvard, and there's a study, I wrote a whole article about it. They kept a chicken heart cells alive for over 30 years by giving it light and getting rid of the toxins. They kept it alive. So they said they believed they could keep those cells alive indefinitely. So if they can keep the chicken heart's cells alive, we could, but we have to get rid of the toxins. We have to put in the nutrients, and that's part of the electron transport chain. So that's why light's important. So back to meditation. What we found was when people meditate, and this is overall until you learn how to meditate, that's why it takes so long. You have to have a teacher. There might be a good practice out there. I'm talking about the 30,000 brains I've scanned are just mom, dads, brothers, sisters. They're not meditators. So what we found was to close your eyes and meditate. Automatically, the default mode network came on. All their negative self-talk, they were actually stressing themselves out when they meditated. And within 3 to 4 minutes, they're going, "This doesn't work for me." They would shake it off because they never listened to themselves. That's why that practice at night is so important, because you're going to deal with those things either consciously or subconsciously. And when Bruce Lipton says 95% of what controls your life experience is your subconscious mind, I think it's 99%. I mean, we do very little on a conscious level. Who's beating your heart right now? Who's controlling your breath? Who's changing those 50 million cells? And which cells are they changing? Who's on the electric transport chain saying this one needs energy, this one doesn't? Who's taking out the trash? All these things. And there's trillions of things happening within you right now that are not controlled by your conscious mind. Don't kid yourself. You're not in control here. You're a passenger. And we need to kick Freddy Krueger off the bus. And we need to put a benevolent, that's why we need mentors. We need to listen to podcasts. We need to read good books. We need to be socialized with great people because we need to continue to remind ourselves that we're part of a collective. And we don't survive. In fact, in the Blue Zone books and all their research, they showed that community is just as important as diet. So when you think about the community you're in, and if you don't have a community, go out and serve your community. You'll find people like you. Go help somebody else. The moment you help somebody else, you get so many endorphins and neurotransmitter activity and all these things that the body, because our body is designed for that. But so many people are looking for a handout. If you start handing out yourself, you're going to get more. We did a study in India, which was pretty exciting. Daji, the guru, they do this heartfelt meditation where they sit and they just imagine energy coming from their heart. And by the way, your heart generates the most energy. In fact, that's why HRV is so popular now. It's a magnetic field and it can extend 18 feet around you. So what they wanted to do, and Dr. Vivek Sharma was with me, and we hooked everybody up to the device called NeuroCheck that I created that can measure 9 parameters of the nervous system. And they wanted to see when these 4 practiced meditators would project energy to this person, how much energy did they receive? And he was shocked. I told him beforehand, I said, we'll see what we get, but I'm going to tell you, the people sending are going to get more energy than he does. We found that to be true. And then I said, but let's make one switch and we'll test them again. So I asked the person in the middle of the four people, I said, I want you to imagine you're a sponge and you're absorbing all the loving energy from these four people that are sending you healing energy. Then his quadrupled because he was open and receptive. He was receiving energy. So many times, we receive energy all the time or we transmit energy all the time. This is what the mitochondria does. They call it the metabolic rate. We can measure this now. How much energy you bring into your body, how much do you transmit? So we want to make sure that the body is in a state of coherence and you're around the right people. They say if you're hanging around three alcoholics, you're probably going to be the fourth. So you want to be around the right people, thinking the right thoughts, flying in the right direction, because there really is energy vampires out there. They rob you of your energy, your dreams, your what you want to do, and sometimes they're family members, so you can't just get rid of them. But you want to know that your space, your time, your energy is your most valuable asset,
Yeah.
and guard it.
Well, Dr. Porter, I mean, there's so many jewels and gems, in everything that you communicated about. Um, I, yeah, so I mean, you have information obviously that we can do, weeks and weeks worth a workshop. So, can people just go to like braintap.com, or where would they
Yeah,
go
if they
just
go to
to?
braintech.com, there's something there that says trial for free. They can download the app for free. And then if they don't like it, just cancel it. 70% of the people that do that will continue to do it. We only have 4% churn, which means only 4% of people who ever download our app ever stop. And they use it 27 times a month. So they're at least using it almost daily. And the reason is to downregulate that nervous system. And it's free for 14 days. If you don't like it, just cancel it. You will not be charged to the 15th day. That's probably the best way at braintap.com.
Well, I appreciate that. Well, Dr. Porter, thank you so much for coming on to my podcast, and thank you so much for the work you're doing. I mean, at the end of the day, consciousness, I think that is the first, the middle, and the final frontier. And in order to be able to optimize its function and how we perceive life and how we perceive ourselves is key for just living. So, thank you so much, Dr. Porter.
You're welcome. Also on BrainTap, if they have Lyme or cancer, we have programs to support that on BrainTap
Love it.
that
Love
help
it.
you with the psychological side of it.
Love it. Thank you so much.
Thank you.